Hey everyone, welcome to an episode of the Elixir Foundation series. In this episode right here, we're going to actually be encapsulating all the code that we wrote, we tried out in the terminal in the previous episode, into actual modules in Elixir. And basically, we're going to call on the module and see what happens. All right, so in our code over here, I'm going to go ahead and create a new folder called the render folder. And in here, I'm going to create a new file called render.ex. And then now I'm going to define a module, botiful.render. All right, so now let's call have a method, a function call called page. And in here, what we can do is we can pass in a URL. So basically, the idea is from our terminal, we are able to call botiful.render.page and then pass in a URL, and it should output the HTML for us. Nice, right? Because that's exactly all we really need. We just need the HTML of the page. So we pass in a URL of a React app, and then we get a fully rendered output, for HTML. Simple, right? So let's go ahead and try it out. So I'm going to do alias Chrome remote interface.rpc. So if you're wondering where this is coming from, in the previous episode, I already showed you guys how to actually use Chrome remote interface to actually render out a HTML. So basically, I'm aliasing this so that I don't have to, reference Chrome remote interface every time. I can just use the .rpc in here. So before we do anything, we need to connect to our Chrome using chroxy. So we have a service, the chroxy service is starting in the background here. So what I'm going to do is PID equals chroxy client.page session. And then here I'm going to pass in a host, local host port 1330. So I already covered all this in the previous episode, so all we're doing now is just putting everything into code like this. And then basically now what we can do is we can reference this PID and basically navigate to the page. So let's do something like this, okay. Res, and then we can do, we don't need to reference this result. And now we can do rpc.page.navigate, PID, and then here we can pass in a URL, and then URL. So basically this URL now goes into here, and then basically now we can just do something like, okay, result. Now if we take a look at the result that we get from the second call, which is to render out the outer HTML, we can see that the result is nested inside of, there's this result, and then value. So what we need to do is, we need to kind of use result, value. Remember, we're just interested in the rendered HTML. We're not interested in any other attributes in here. So the data structure for all this is defined by the Chrome remote interface. So again, if you're interested, check that documentation out. It'll have more detail on how all this is structured and why it all works together and all the kinds of things we can do. So now let's go ahead and actually render the page. So rpc.runtime.evaluate PID, and then here we're going to pass in an expression. So the expression is actually just JavaScript expressions, right? So document element dot outer HTML. So basically what we're doing is we're just going into here, in going into the browser, and we're rendering this expression. So actually, let me try and render this inside of, for example, this browser here. So I'm going to go to the console, hit that. You can see that it outputs the same HTML. So this is kind of exactly what we're doing. Like you can see here, the HTML has, background, blah, blah, blah. So basically that's what we're getting here. This is just a JavaScript expression to extract the HTML out from the browser. So so it works with Safari as well, as you can see over here. And it also works in, obviously this is, we're interfacing with Chrome. So all we're doing is we're directly manipulating Chrome headless. You're actually controlling it, using our code. And that's the beautiful thing about this whole Chrome remote interface thing we've got going. All right, so that will pretty much do it. Now we have the result and we output the result. So now we should technically be able to restart our application called bodyful.render and then the page, the function, and pass in a URL, and we should just get bam, HTML rendered, right? Well, let's try it out. We both know it's not going to be that simple. So I'm going to close this and I'm going to start my application up again. All right, so let's try it out. So bodyful.render.page, and then we're going to pass in the HTML, the URL. Hit enter. Bam. Wait a minute. This does not look like the previous HTML. This has loading. That's not what we signed up for. That's not what we got last time in the terminal. It's not the same thing. Let's look at the actual output. So here's your HTML, font awesome, something active with lots of style overlay, like lots of CSS, inline CSS and all that stuff. What happened to all this stuff? Oh no. Seems like it's just not working. Oh, maybe something happened. Let's try it again. All right, so let's call it again. Again. How come? Oh no. Oh. So the problem is that, when we're running the code in line by line in the terminal, we give Chrome enough time to actually go and fetch and render the page and make network calls and do all the stuff it needs to do, what a browser does on a daily basis, to render the entire page. But what happens is when we are actually doing this in code, because everything goes by so fast, Chrome hasn't had the time to complete doing the page yet, and we're already asking it to render the result. So what we can do in here is we can put a timer.sleep, and then let's say 2000. So this is in milliseconds, so 2000 is going to be 2 seconds. So let's give it an extra 2 seconds to do everything, and then see what happens. So I'm here. I'm going to go into the application again. So I'm going to do bodyful.render.page, HTTPS, artellectual.com. So I'm going to render the page. I'm going to give it 2 seconds, and you can see now the output of the HTML is much better. This is exactly what we're expecting. We've got the font awesome, exactly the same as what we've got over here in the actual browser. So, this is the thing, right? So, you might be able to say, well, hey, we can just let it sleep for 2 seconds, and then, and then everything will be fine. So your code is done. Well, it's not that simple. And here's the thing, right? Maybe this page that we're experimenting with takes 2 seconds to render, but what about more complicated page? What if you have like, 10 of network calls and it takes longer than 2 seconds? And what if some pages take less than 2 seconds? We don't actually even know how long this page takes to render, because to be honest, we just conjured up a number like 2 seconds. But here's the thing. We need a solution where, when we create a page session, we need to be able to reference the PID. So we need to store the PID in our process, right? Somehow we need to be able to store this process, and we need to be able to have some kind of tracking that says, hey, now the page is completely rendered, and then now we can get the output and then put it in cache or something like that. So now what we're happening is we're starting to think like, oh, we need to kind of like maintain the state of this session, of this rendering session, and then basically we need to check on the status and all that stuff. So when you start thinking like that, in Elixir we have a construct called GenServer that is designed exactly for this. So the other question is, right now we're just one person calling on this code. What about, if we are rendering concurrently, together, like 10 pages? Like, what if we're getting hit by Google bot and it's as requesting 10, 20 pages all at once? We need some kind of way to track the state of every individual page that we're rendering all together, that we're sending to Chrome and rendering, and then, tracking the network calls and all that stuff and making that all complete. And this is where, the need for GenServer comes in. So, This episode is not free. This is a members exclusive episode. It's extremely important we understand everything that's going on over here, because in the next episode, what we're going to be doing is we're going to be covering the basics of Gen server. And I'm going to talk a little bit about why Gen server is important. We kind of understand the problem now. In the next episode, we can actually start to implement some basic Gen servers and see how it can be useful for us. So that's going to wrap it up for this episode. Thank you for becoming a member. And with that, I'll see you guys in the next episode.